Flood insurance workshop, which will be presented by our PPI committee with Lisa Foster, Kim Haar, and they're going to take everything from here. This was all impromptu, but stay for pizza and cookies afterwards because they're providing all that.
What's PPI mean?
Program for Public Information.
Yes.
Yay! I passed. Thank you for coming.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'll put the agenda up here while everybody's getting situated. I'm going to cover several things that are going to help us get some points that help you get a flood insurance discount, and you probably already know all of that stuff, so I'll move relatively quickly through that so that we can get the main act over here. Kim is our insurance town resident insurance specialist. She knows everything about flood insurance, so she's going to take over after I go through all the preliminary stuff. So we're going to talk about the floodplain management and CRS program that the town has here. They have a very proactive program, which is why you all get a discount on your flood insurance. I'm going to talk a little bit about the flood risk here on our barrier island of a peninsula on a peninsula. Some property protection techniques that you could use for smaller events. They're not going to save us from a Cat 5, but they'll help you out with the little events. Some preparedness, and maybe we can reflect back on what you did or didn't do during Irma and compare that to the lists that I have put together here. We're going to talk about the flood insurance rate map, the FEMA map, and some upcoming map changes, and different flood zones that are on there now versus what's going to be coming up on there. And then I will pass it off to Kim to talk about flood insurance, and she only has one bullet, but she has most of this presentation. There was too much to put under flood insurance and all the different things she's going to cover, so she's one bullet on here. Okay, so raise your hand if you are familiar with the community rating system. Raise your hand if you are familiar with the National Flood Insurance Program. Okay, so as you know then, FEMA implements National Flood Insurance Program because the town has adopted a floodplain ordinance and has all these things that they do flood protection wise. You are allowed to get flood insurance. FEMA provides flood insurance. So being in the NFIP makes you allowed to get flood insurance. It makes it available to you. The community rating system falls underneath the National Flood Insurance Program. So everything that the town does that's above and beyond those real basic little things that the NFIP requires, they accrue points for it, which turn into a score. That score equates into your flood insurance discount. So right now the town is a class 7, Steve? It's a class 7, which is a 15% discount on your flood insurance premiums. So the more the town does, the more points they get, the better their rating, the more insurance discount you get. And the town is very proactive in this. Part of what they are doing is the program for public information, which Kim and I are on, and it's to relay the information to you. Raise your hand if you got a survey this year, a survey saying how do you want to receive information. Raise your hand if you're on the email list. Huh, and you did not get it. Raise your hand if you don't open the email blast from the town. Okay, so we send out a survey every single year to find out what you want to know and how you want to receive the information. And we had, what do we have, Chris, 75 participants? Yeah, almost 8.
Survey mailed out.
It was sent in an email blast, and it was a digital survey, so you just had to click on the link. September, I believe? I believe it was September.
How do you get on the email list?
You give your email address to Mary, or you can do it online. On the website, there's a place that you can sign up for it. Okay, so the more the town does, the bigger the discount you guys get. This is all part of that. So what we're doing here tonight is earning us points for that program. Any questions so far? Excellent.
Do it every month.
Yes.
What other things does the city do to get us started?
Okay, so they have higher building regulations, such as 2 feet of freeboard. So whatever the base flood elevation is, say it's 10, you're required to build up to 12. So that accrues a lot of points, actually. Having parks and other open spaces that serve as an area where floodwater could go without damaging structures gets the town points. You guys are doing so much stuff. The program for public information, the mail-outs that you guys get when you get the brochure in the mail with a letter, the inserts in the newspapers, what else? These meetings.
Drainage projects.
Oh yeah, the drainage projects, making sure all the drains are clear. The little placards that you see, only rain down the drain gets them points. all the emergency response stuff that they do. So all the alerts that you get and the Facebook posts and all the messaging and the website itself gets points. So the fact that they built that new website a couple of years ago, that gets the town a lot of points. Keeping materials in the library gets them points. So there's a lot of different things that aren't actually required by NFIP. NFIP just says you have to adopt a floodplain ordinance and you have to enforce those regulations. That's all you have to do. So all this other stuff is above and beyond, so we get points for it.
And Lisa, we are in the middle of getting Everbridge, which is the text messaging system.
Correct. So,
Notification.
raise your hand if you've heard of Alert Pinellas. Alert Pinellas?
That's a
Okay,
phone
so, yes, that's the phone call thing that you sign up for. So, Alert Pinellas is through, they keep switching companies. There's been Code Red, they're going to Everbridge. There's a bunch of different companies that it's run through behind the scenes. The town is also getting on that now. The state started implementing one so that all the municipalities can jump on. So now the town will be able to send all of you just based on radius. So it's you draw a polygon on a map basically, or you put in a geographic shape file basically, and it'll send the alert to everybody that you tell it to send the alert to. So your mayor will type up a little message and hit go on the software, and then it'll ping your phone. You'll get a text message.
And
Okay.
those are points.
Yes, and those are our points. Those are our emergency warning and response points. So there's four main activities in the community rating system program. So there's a series on public outreach here today. This is part of that. Then there's a series on the higher regulations and the open space, the parks and the regulations and all that. There's another series which is on your floodplain management planning, which the town has a floodplain management plan, and it also participates in the multi-jurisdictional local mitigation strategy with the county and all the other jurisdictions in the county. That gets a lot of points. And then the emergency warning and response planning and actions, that gets a lot of points. So it's kind of broken down into 4 chunks. Okay, so these are the messages. Remember I said we get points for messages? So these are the messages, and when I tell you these messages, we're getting points. So find out your flood risk, which you are, like I said, on a barrier island, which is on a peninsula, which is a peninsula on a peninsula. So you all know that you are prone to flooding. Find out how much flooding could cost you. I mean, just a foot of water in your house can cost a tremendous amount of money. If it gets above your electrical circuits, it's even more. I mean, the higher it gets, the bigger the price tag goes. Protect your property from flooding, and I'll show you some techniques you can use. Prepare ahead, and we just went through this. We had a trial run with Irma. Understand flood insurance and get flood insurance, and Kim is going to help you with those last 2 bullets.
I live in a condo, so I'm not on, house, right? And I'm on the 4th floor. So is that an oxymoron to get flood insurance?
No, it is not. Kim is going to cover the flood insurance part of that, but if a wave came and took out the whole building, you'd probably wish you had some insurance.
Or get into your building.
Yeah,
Sounds
right.
like-
Or maybe it's condemned and you can't get in, there are a lot of different parts that go along with that.
Carry that insurance?
The condo carries the main part. I'm gonna
Okay.
defer that to Kim when we get there, but the condo has one policy, and then you can get your individual policies too for your contents, anything that's not attached to the
Well,
building.
that's what I was gonna say. I have content,
Yep,
but I don't have the structure over everything.
well, the association should have it.
Yeah, they do have, yes.
Yep. Okay, so there are different types of flooding that we need to take a look at, and Pinellas County has a map service center which shows all of these different risks, and you can look it up by address. So if you have other properties on the mainland or wherever the riverine will possibly affect you. So we have surface and localized flooding, and we have this here, and you've all seen this. When it rains real hard, or actually back in October, we had a super high tide, and the water was coming up the storm drains. So we had roads underwater, and it was blue sunny skies. So imagine if it had been dumping rain right there at that moment in time, pouring down rain for a few hours. It would have been a lot worse flooding. So we need to keep in mind these localized areas, it gets low, so the water's supposed to go in the drain and then go out, but if the tide is hiding the end of that pipe, the water can't get out. So we get these localized floods, or if it just rains too hard for the stormwater pipes and things to handle the capacity of it, they can back up as well. Also, if you are letting your leaves and stuff go in them, you guys got to keep your storm drains clear, because Steve is only one person and has a staff of 2 more people. They can't check every storm drain. They do check every storm drain, but they can't do it every single day before every single storm. So you guys need to keep an eye on your storm drains. And then of course we have the coastal and storm surge, and this one's a big one here. And with sea level rise and everything else, we need to understand that we are definitely at high risk. The entire town is in the FEMA Special Flood Hazard Area, which means that if you have a federally backed mortgage, you are required to have flood insurance. If you don't have a federally backed mortgage, of course, it's recommended because we are in a high-risk area. We're also in a storm surge area, which you know, and I've done some screenshots here of the different depths of the water with different evacuation levels. So with an evacuation level A, we're looking at a few feet of water potentially over the land. Evac B, we're looking at 3 to 6 feet of water. So this is on the roads, this is on the lawns, this is 3 to 6 feet of water everywhere that's yellow. If we were to go to an evacuation zone C, this is what we could anticipate. With a D, the entire island's underwater with more than 9 feet. Now let's talk about an evac E. This is likely a Cat 5, and it's way underwater at this point. So even though we say, oh, we haven't had a hurricane in so long, Irma was kind of a wake-up call. We were fortunate that she jostled east and didn't come, but it was pretty scary at the beginning, looking at those potential depths of the water, because, you know, the National Hurricane Service puts out those maps. They put them out every 4 hours, and you can take a look at them. And we were in that evac B, and the water was projected to be pretty deep. So had it not taken that little turn, we would have had some major, major damage from flooding. So it's absolutely no joke. So I told you I'd give you some tips for protecting your property, and of course this is going to be for your smaller events. This is not for a Cat 5, so don't think of this as a Cat 5. But if you're in one of the older homes that's on the ground, like myself, you might want to think about elevating your electrical equipment, raising up your AC and your hot water heater and things like that. If you get just a little bit of water in, that's a couple things you're not going to have to buy, right? You replace some of your little drywall or whatever, and it's not going to be as much of an expense if you're elevating these things. And then, of course, you can use flood-resistant materials. Sewer backflow valves, we all know if there's no power, our lift stations can't work. We have generators, and during Irma, the town did a really good job of rotating those generators around and trying to move the sewer so that it could get out, so that it wasn't backing up into everybody's houses. But being on a barrier island is in itself a risk, so you need to get these sewer backflow valves if possible. The flood doors are another thing that can help, and I've Googled this, and there's a bunch of different ones out there. Most of them take some labor to put on, but they might be worth it for a smaller event. And, you know, I'm talking, this is going to help you, like the sandbags would help you. If somebody's driving down the road and they make a wake and the waves come flapping up at your house, it'll help from that. But it's not going to help if we've got 6 feet of standing water for 3 days, obviously. And then flood vents, I'll let Kim talk about this a little bit more, but there was a period of time where the building code did not require flood vents in the A zone, in the AE zone. They were required in the VE zone, but not in the AE zone. So we have a lot of structures that were built, I'm not sure how many in this town, but there are a lot of structures built without these flood vents, and that makes the insurance rate go way, way, way up. So it may be worth it if you're in one of those homes that was built during that time period to go ahead and put the flood vents in, because it'll lower your rate tremendously. Because of course the downstairs, everything below base flood can only be used for parking and storage. So having those flood vents isn't going to affect anything negatively, but it will help with the insurance. And then I already mentioned this. This is obviously something that I care a bit about. So clearing your storm drains. And this is keeping the leaves off your lawn, keeping everything in the grass, trying to clean up before storms will help. So this is, I see a couple of people giggling back there because they recognize this storm drain that everybody in the neighborhood goes out there and cleans this storm drain. After every rain event, we all make sure that before it's going to rain or be, you know, severe weather rolling in, that we have everything, you know, moved, mulch is up, everything's out of the way so that it doesn't clog up the storm drain. And then this is what I was talking about. Take a look at this list. Did you have a plan? Did you have photos or video of your house and all the stuff in it? Did you have your important documents all organized and filed someplace safe that you could pick them up and take them with you, or uploaded to a cloud somewhere? Was your car full of gas? Did you have transportation set up? Did you have accommodations made in advance? Did you have your medications filled? Did you have a place for your pets to go? I mean, these are all the things that we just went through with Irma. How prepared were you? Raise your hand if you had done everything on this list. Good for you. But we need to all get to the place where when we have plenty of warning when there's a hurricane coming. We see it so far out. We have plenty of warning, so there's really no excuse not to be prepared. Here's the Alert Pinellas that I referred to earlier. If you go to pinellascounty.org/Alert Pinellas, and I gave you guys a copy of the slides because I know they're sometimes challenging to read all the way up here. Make sure you're tuning into your local news, and then there's social media. The town has its own Facebook page now, and the county has a website and Facebook page. And then one of those weather radios is always good to have too, with batteries in it. So, here are those messages. Find out your flood risk. Raise your hand if you are in an evacuation zone A. Very good. Raise your hand if you are in a FEMA special flood hazard area. High risk. Yes, everybody. Very good. Protect your property. Those were the slides I showed you. Basically elevate your stuff. Keep your storm drains clear. Get sewer backflow valves. Prepare ahead and stay safe. And then find out how much flooding could cost. How much is it going to cost if you get a foot of water in your house or 2 feet of water in your house? How much is that going to cost? Can you take some kind of mitigation strategies in advance that would offset that? Understand flood insurance and get flood insurance. I'm going to let Kim handle those two. Now this is a picture of the FEMA firm flood insurance rate map. Remember I mentioned there's a bunch of different risk maps out there. So the flood insurance rate maps are the ones that are going to drive the insurance requirement and the rates. So whether you're in an A zone or a V zone is going to affect it. A lot of things are going to affect it, but it's all coming off this map. It's not coming off the storm surge map. It's not coming off of, the county's riverine floodplain models. This is all off of FEMA's maps. Right now, we have AE zones with base flood elevations ranging from 10 to 12 and VE with base flood elevations ranging from 12 to 14. So everybody in here is going to have to build to above that, 2 feet above that, if you're building a new house or you're substantially improving an existing structure. We have new maps coming out. So we're going to get a new zone. It's called the Coastal A Zone. So the Coastal A Zone, I'm going to skip a slide. I'll go back to that one. The Coastal A Zone is the area where they've decided that from the modeling, they do a lot of coastal modeling. So that Coastal A Zone, you could have anywhere from 1.5 to 3 feet of wave action. The VE zone is 3 or more feet of wave action. So right now we know, okay, VE, we're going to have 3 or more feet of wave action, and then AE. But we don't know how far in the waves are going to go, how high the waves are going to be. So we've done some more detailed studies, not we. FEMA has done more detailed studies with their consultants, and they've delineated a line on the map now where they say this line is where the waves are going to start being less than 1.5 feet. So anywhere from that line over to the VE zone, that's going to be the area of 1.5 to 3 feet. Right now, the insurance rates aren't affected by that, but building code is. Because we're on an island, though, we have to build on piles or piers anyhow, just because of the way the soil is. So it won't probably affect your building regulations. The new Florida building code did just go into effect, so now flood vents are required in VE zones, and they'll be required in these coastal AE zones.
I was under the impression Reddington Shores didn't require a pile driven on this side of the Gulf Boulevard.
I defer that to the building official.
We changed that,
So it's back to piling?
yes. Well, it's back to the Florida Building Code, which says that we're a coastal high hazard and refers you to an engineering manual, the
ASCE 24.
ASCE 2405, which is a newer date now. But basically, and that says unless the engineer can prove that it's going to handle all the loads applied at the same time, including subsidence of the soil and other conditions like that, then they've got to put filings.
There are some engineers that will sign off. I will tell you that.
Well, Steve would have to agree with the results to accept it.
Correct.
No, so if the engineering analysis shows that they're resistant to scour, the stem wall with the backfill stem wall is permitted in the coastal A zone, but it's few and far between that you're going to find, especially on a barrier island, an engineer that's going to sign off on a stem wall, backfill stem wall. in a coastal A zone?
They did.
Okay. So the rule is no, unless you have an engineering analysis. So here's a picture of what the new maps are going to look like, not the colors, but I wanted to point out that black line. So that black line has little arrows on it. That is called the LMWA, Limit of Moderate Wave Action. So from that line over to where the VE zone starts, which is red in this picture, that is the coastal A zone, where you have 1.5 to 3 feet of wave action. On the other side, so on the right-hand side, on the inland side of that black line, that's just regular AE zone. So this image shows you the yellow is the AE zone and the red is the BE zone. This is not normally how it's shown, but just to point out where it is. And the black line is the LMWA. So the new zones on the map that are coming out, the coastal A zones, are going to be from the black line where it's pointing until you hit the V zone. So you're in an AE zone, but you're on that seaward side of that line. So that's that coastal A zone. That's the new zone on the maps.
There's not exactly a lot of detail that I can see from here. Where approximately is that line?
So they're working on them now. So FEMA has draft preliminary maps. As soon as the maps come out, we'll make them available to you.
I mean, that's not something that's obvious like
Yeah,
golf
is that
or
golf?
something.
No, it's not. So the last, when FEMA did the maps that we have in place now, the original coastal modeling was done back in the 70s. And obviously technology has come a long way since then. And they modified it, I think, in the 80s and then again in 03 a little bit. But the whole coastal modeling hasn't really been done. So the risk map is what it's called. It's the process that FEMA goes through. And they've gone through and they've done an area from Manatee County up to Citrus County. And that's our area. So we're within that. So all of those counties from Manatee up to Citrus are getting new maps, including Hillsborough County. And we don't know exactly when they're going to come out. They're still working on them. But there are working maps that are in progress. As soon as the preliminary maps come out, we'll get them up and we'll have another meeting so that you know exactly if you're affected by the change. You might not be. I mean, you might be in an AE 10 right now and stay in an AE 10. You know, we don't know what to expect until we get the maps. But the FEMA is going to provide those maps to us, and then the county will put them on their map service center. FEMA will put them on their map service center. The county's hiring somebody to do an evaluation to make sure all the assumptions that went into the modeling are decent, and the modeling itself, the methodology was good. So they'll do a whole analysis of it so that, you know, we can just make sure that no appeals need to be made. Now, if there's an area that looks like it might be incorrect, then we can make an appeal to FEMA, but it's going to require engineering analysis, which obviously costs money, so the town will have to decide how they want to proceed with that. But FEMA's going to provide us with the maps, and they're going to hold one meeting, I believe, in the county, so the town will hold a separate meeting, I would presume. So we'll have another meeting once we get the maps so that we can talk about them and see where the changes are.
So if you're, with the new maps,
Mhm.
if you're in an AE zone or an A zone or a BE zone, what actual effect will that have on your insurance rates or?
Right, so if you're going, say, from an AE zone into a BE zone, that would affect insurance rates. And I'm going to let Kim talk about this. One of the main things in her presentation is talking about these map changes and how you could be affected.
Right after Irma, the paper announced that Duke was going to set aside $300 million to put our wires underground. Have they talked to you about that?
No. I haven't talked to Duke about that. So the undergrounding, I have heard that we are undergrounding something. Steve, do you know about it?
The town is utilizing some Gulf Boulevard beautification grant money
Well, not the wires, not the wires.
to do some undergrounding
Yeah.
of the wires crossing Gulf
East side.
Boulevard
Uh-huh.
and the east side of
East
Gulf
side.
Boulevard.
But $300 million is a lot of money. That would be cover Zone A, they said.
Don't believe everything you read in the newspaper about Duke. Because they don't even do the wires. When they bought the company, they bought just the transmission lines. Those lines that are overhead, they have nothing to do with it.
Okay.
So,
I can't speak to that. I don't know, so I don't want to speculate. I have no
I've run
idea.
into construction, so.
Question answered. Nobody knows.
Okay.
Nobody knows. So we'll have additional public meetings to make sure you guys all understand what's happening, if you're affected at all, and if you are affected, how it will affect you. And of course, we're going to review the maps to make sure they're reasonable, and if they're not, make an appeal. So these are the things that can happen, and this might address your question that you just asked. AE to coastal AE is a possibility, right? We just talked about that Limbwall line getting added. So there's a possibility if you live right along the coast on the, on the fingers that go out, there's a good chance that some of the ones around the edge will end up in a coastal AE. You could go AE even to VE. That's a possibility. VE to coastal AE is also a possibility. So if they think that the wave action really isn't going to be that high, they might bump you back down into the coastal AE. The base flood elevation might change. So the base flood elevation might go up or it might go down. So your zone could change, your base flood elevation could change, both could change, neither could change. So we don't know until we get the maps, but there are a lot of different things that it could do. And I'm going to pass it off to Kim at this point so she can talk about how those changes are going to impact your insurance rates, your flood insurance rates. And Kim is with Har Insurance. She's on the PPI committee. Kim and I have been on the PPI committee. She and I and Chris, and I have several PPI people in here. And yep, Jeff in the back. I guess that's it. I think Mike's joining us on the PPI committee pretty soon. So we've been working together on this for years now. I think we started it in 2014. And she's just really fantastic in bringing the information about the flood insurance for us.
So you talked a lot about the AE coastal and all that, but the BFE, BFF?
Base flood elevation.
What?
So that's your 100-year storm event, so that 1% chance of it getting to be that deep. So 1% annual chance. So every year there's a 1% chance that we could get a flood that high.
And is that the whole island?
That is, yes, the entire island is in the FEMA Special Flood Hazard Area, yes. So there's a base flood elevation for everything in the island. So right now,
Is there an actual number on that?
yes, the FEMA firm has all those numbers. So right now, everything on the island, everything in the town is going to be an AE with a base flood elevation of 10, 11, or 12, or a VE, 12, 13, or 14.
I didn't notice the parentheses.
Yeah, that's the base. Those are the elevations of the water. And the ground elevations out here are roughly 4 or 5. So, 4 or less. I was trying to be optimistic. I think Town Hall's on a little hill though, so it's a little bit higher.
They brought that in.
So, without further ado, here comes our insurance girl.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. So this part of the presentation is going to be focusing on the factors that impact your rate. Because there's quite a few, and what Lisa's been talking about, the zone change, the BFE, the age of your home, all those things impact the individual pricing for your property. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on going forward. And with regards to these changes that are coming up, when we're talking about the rate impact, and you just ask, what's that going to do to our rate? It's going to depend on where you fall into this category. So, for example, AE to the coastal AE, as Lisa shared with you, right now there's no rate difference for the coastal AE versus the AE. Could that change in the future because this is now a new zone? Probably. But it's not going to be in the immediate future. AE to VE, that's a very big impact on rating. The VE to the coastal AE, in reality, I don't think we're going to see that happen here. We're going to see some A's to V's, but I doubt we're going to see any V's go down. The BFE changes. Yeah, we're going to see that. And it is going to go, I'm sure, both ways because of the topography and things of that nature. I do expect to see that. So whenever we're talking about the rate impact, we're talking about the actuary rating and we're talking about then grandfathering. How many of you have heard about grandfathering whenever you hear about the NFIP? And what the NFIP does is every time that there is a mapping change, they do have what's called grandfathering. And grandfathering means that if you have had continuous coverage in place over the course of however so many years, then you're grandfathered into that current zone. Or built-in compliance. If you didn't, you can sometimes hear the words built-in compliance, and that's that the home was built according to the map at the time that it was originally constructed. So that's going to be important as we go through this presentation whenever we get to how that's going to impact going forward. And that's really kind of all these different things. So the flood zone, the year built, base flood elevation, your lowest floor, do you have an enclosure or not? Also depends on what zone you're in. Flood vents. Flood vents does make a difference, and the elevation certificate. Now, how many of you have been getting the letters this year regarding from FEMA that were absolutely horribly written about understanding whether or not you need an elevation certificate, right? And really what they're saying is that an elevation certificate is always good to have because, you know, for some folks it could benefit you to have an elevation certificate even if you have an older home. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And the reason for that is because pre-firm versus post-firm. So a pre-firm home is one that was built before the firm maps were put into compliance. So for us, that's about December 31st of 1974. So if you have a home that was built before 74, it's going to be what we call pre-firm. If it's after 74, then it's going to be considered post-firm. And what does that really mean? It means that after the 74, you needed to have an elevation certificate in order to get a rate. Before then, it's a subsidized rate. That's what you'll hear it be referred to as a subsidized rate. But if you were post-firm and after that, it's a full risk rate, which means that your property alone is being charged the flood premium for the risk of your property. Doesn't matter about the neighbor next to you, you know, down the street, whatever theirs is your rate based on your house. And it's also based on the elevation. Are you sea level? You know, are you the base flood elevation? Are you a +1, a +2? Are you a negative? You're going to hear all those terms with regards to rating of flood. So what does this really mean? All right. So in your packet, you might see it, and you'll be able to see it a little. It kind of convolutes on the screen here. But this is what we're talking about: the difference between a pre-firm and a post-firm house. If you'll notice, on the pre-firm, you see the blue line is straight across, right? That means that the rate for all three of these properties is exactly the same. It's exactly the same for a $200,000 structure with $80,000 in contents. So whether it is 1 foot above the base flood, whether it's 1 foot below, whether it's 10 feet below, it's the same price. Okay, so then you look down to post-firm and you see, even though the blue line stays where you are, with that 1 foot, with the 1 foot above, look at that different price. It's $819 a year versus the pre-firm, it's $2,200 a year, right? And the reason for that is because you're on a positive elevation, you're up. But now, if you go to 1 foot below, all right, the pre-firm rate's $2,200, but the post-firm is $5,600. Okay, and why is that? Because you're 1 foot below. The chances of you flooding versus the person who's 1 foot above, of course, is greater. And now when we go down to the 10 feet below, which, you know, on some of these beach properties, it's not unheard of to see -8, -9, -10. They do exist out here. But you'll see the pricing difference between $2,000 and $20,000. If any of you were around the years that Big Waters first came out and you heard all the uproar in the media about the flood premiums going skyrocketing, you know, this is because a lot of those pre-firm homes were going to this kind of rating. So, and these are 2012 rates. This is just a really cool slide that we like to use because it really drives that point home about the difference between the two, pre-firm versus post-firm. Now, with that being said, one of the reasons why you're getting those letters about the elevation certificates is because, let's say, for example, that the 2235, the 1 foot above, let's say that's your home. So you're paying $2,200 a year. But you're 1 foot above. If you had an elevation certificate that showed that, you could be paying $819 a year. So depending on the elevation of your individual property, it could make a difference in your rating. So just because it's an older home doesn't always necessarily mean that pre-firm is the best rate for you. That's why they're sending out the letter saying it could be in your best interest to get an elevation certificate. Typically, whenever you have an EC, you're still going to get the better of the two rates. The insurance companies will always give you the benefit of the better rate. Yeah, I know, I heard that today too. Yes.
And the more you go up, instead of 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot, your rate even goes lower.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the elevation certificate is and can be a benefit to you.
And if you have it done and it goes the wrong way, let's say you're in a pre-firm construction and you have an elevation certificate and it goes the wrong way, does that affect your rate?
When it goes the opposite direction, so in other words, it's basically showing that you're like, let's say a -5
Right.
instead of 0. So you would continue to get the pre-firm rate. You should continue to get the pre-firm rate in that scenario. As long as you have continuous coverage and you're grandfathered, you'll get the pre-firm rate.
Can I interrupt and add two things? So first, before you decide if you're going to get an elevation certificate, look at the topography, because if your house has no stairs up to it, you just walk in and you look at the topo line and it's 4 feet, and you look at the firm and it's 10 feet, you're gonna be -6-ish, -5 if you're lucky, if you have to step up, 2 steps up. So if you get an elevation certificate, all that's gonna do is tell NFIP when to put a cap on increasing your rates, because the rates are going up right now. So the rates are going up anywhere from 5 to 18% per year on your primary structure, if it's your primary residential structure, 25% a year if it's your secondary home. And they'll keep increasing the rate that much every single year until they hit where it's supposed to be, the actuary rate. But if they don't have an elevation certificate, they don't know what the actuary rate is. So that's gonna tell them when to stop doing the increases, which, and honestly, -6 feet, I mean, it's gonna take a long time to get to that actuary rate. So you can wait a few years to get your elevation certificate if your topo shows that.
Okay. So, okay, so that was pre-firm versus post-firm. Now we're going to talk about the difference between A versus V. Okay, so your A zones, E zones versus VE zones. So we already know that in a flood zone V, there's a greater risk of wave action, right? That's really the main difference between the A versus V. And we also know that any enclosure at all on a V zone is going to increase your premium. Now,
Garages are enclosed.
in a V zone, a garage is considered an enclosure. A 200 square foot closet is considered an enclosure when you're talking about a V zone. Remember, there's a difference between an A and a V, okay? Because it's huge. When in the world of insurance for flood, the difference is huge.
But breakaway walls
Breakaway walls, yes,
is going to save you.
is going to save you. But it's still considered an enclosure for flood. So now we have the coastal AE, which is talking about that 1.5 versus 3 foot wave action that Lisa just talked about. And then your typical AE zone, which is going to be pretty much more rising water than wave action. Okay, so this was just another one of those, the difference between the red and the yellow.
How does this relate to the pre-firm versus post-firm?
It's a different rating factor. So you can be a pre-firm A, you can be a pre-firm V. You can be a post-firm A, post-firm V. Okay?
So I'm colorblind. Did that actually show the difference between A and B?
Yes, It did, the colors. On your printout, it could be shaded, maybe, can you see if it's a little
Yeah,
darker?
You're usually red,
Yeah.
green colors.
Yeah.
Kim, it may be helpful just to clarify, so for those who are sitting there listening to the V-Zone and worried that it's going to impact them, I mean, V-Zone for the most part is going to be everything that is on the beach. It's going to be west of Gulf Boulevard. If you're east of Gulf Boulevard, now there may be an exception to this, but for the most part, if you are east of Gulf Boulevard, you are not going to be in a V-Zone.
So we will know that soon, hopefully, when the new maps come out, and then we'll be able to tell that for sure, you know. So here's the difference between wave action and an A zone and a V zone. Which one do you think is the V zone? The one on the left, exactly. And if you can see that, can you tell what's still standing? Elevated structures. Elevated structures. So this is actually real pictures from, I believe this was from Texas. Ashley Tharp from Wright Flood is usually my wingman at these, and she's not here because she's sick, but I'm pretty sure this was from Texas. All right, so let's talk about the difference in the rating of the AE versus the VE. So what I did here is I tried to do a mock quote, if you will, and it's not really mock because you just kind of go in, you put the information in, and when you don't have an elevation certificate, it's a lot easier. So a one-story pre-firm A based on $250,000 of coverage, $100,000 in contents with a $2,000 deductible was $3,800 a year. Now, you know, the dollars and cents are always going to change a little bit. But if I took that same information and went to a V zone, do you see what that premium is for the V zone? The A versus the V, it's $8,000 a year. Okay, so $3,000 versus $8,000 for the difference between the AE versus the VE for a pre-firm. Or so these are ones where you don't have to have an elevation certificate. All right, now, and the whole purpose of this screen right here is to talk about the difference between, on the V zone, what the enclosure does to the rate. So the first picture shows an elevated one-story structure with absolutely nothing underneath, so the water can go right through. Okay, and the premium, even though it's, you know, elevated, you know, you're still talking about a $5,000 rate on this kind of structure because you're pretty much right there in a V zone. You're going to get the wave. Just remember that, you know, it's not just the fact that the water's flowing through. But with FEMA, with the NFIP, the big difference is in a V zone, the enclosure impact on the rate. And it's not necessarily always how big the enclosure is, it's just the fact that there's an enclosure there. And so the fact that we have a $250,000, same structure, so to speak, at the $250,000, the only difference is this has an enclosure of less than 300 square feet. And that's the impact on the rate for that enclosure. And so what I'm just trying to make sure that it's clear is that whenever you're getting quotes for your insurance, or you have insurance and you know and you're wondering why in the world your insurance is so expensive, it's if you have that enclosed space down below and you're in a V zone, that's why. Now the third structure is a 3-story. The bottom has breakaway walls. It's no living space, it's just garage area. You can't really compare the two premiums because it's two different structures, but it was still a very similar premium. But once again, what I want you to understand is these factors that go into this are, do you have breakaway walls? Do you have vents? Is it pretty much parking only? There's no drywall down there. You know, it's not livable space. Those are all things that impact those rates, especially for an elevated structure. I'm hesitant to ask any questions on this screen. Yes.
So, if you're interested in buying a house that the previous owners didn't have flood insurance on it, because say it was paid off and they didn't have to have insurance on it, so as a new owner, if you buy that house, you will no longer qualify for the discounted rate?
You're gonna be able to like, if it's post-firm, okay? If it's post-firm, you're gonna have an elevation certificate. You're gonna be able today to be in what map it is today, or if it was built into compliance when it was originally built. You can still be grandfathered for built-in compliance.
Or if it's pre-firm?
If it's pre-firm, it's pre-firm. There's no built-in compliance on pre-firm. But if you haven't, you could still buy coverage on that pre-firm home today at today's map rate. So if it's Zone A today, and you want to buy insurance for the first time, you're buying Zone A coverage. You're buying coverage in a Zone A. So if it's after the map change, okay, so today you're in a A. If you don't have insurance in place when that map changes and it hits a V, and you go to buy insurance for the very first time in that V zone, you are buying insurance in a V zone rate, or at a V zone rate.
And remind me when this is supposed to happen.
This year.
April, May, March, April, May-ish. So we're gonna have, that's when the city's gonna have another meeting, and the county will have meetings whenever the preliminary maps come out, because when the preliminary maps come out, you will know. You will know where your house is gonna fall in that zone change, if it's gonna be a zone change.
But if it's, were you talking about pre-firm or post-firm?
Either or, it really doesn't matter.
So if you go from an A to a V and you're pre-firm, you're...
Remember that screen where I showed the three, what was that, did I just pass it? Right here. So if there's no coverage in force, and you're in pre-firm A, and then you get moved to a V, you're looking at a pre-firm V rate. There will be no grandfathering because there was not continuous coverage, and it can't be built into compliant because it's pre-firm.
The house is probably worth about $500,000, so you might as well tell them.
So, so what we're just trying to make sure that residents understand here is that, there's a lot of different rate factors that go into what makes up your individual premium. So full risk rating means that you're basically being charged for the rate that your property should be charged at. A pre-firm before 74 here, basically 74 and older is going to be pre-firm. Grandfathering is going to be if you've had continuous coverage or if you were built in compliance at the time originally constructed. So those are the things that impact us here with regards to our town.
The continuous coverage, does that have to be for the same owner?
No.
The property.
The property. The property.
Itself.
So, but like I said, even today, and the old Biggert Waters was different. The way that it is today, if you don't have coverage on your property today, you go out and you buy a pre-firm Zone A, E rate. Only thing, you're going to have a 30-day wait because you didn't have prior coverage. You're going to have a 30-day wait, and then you're going to have a policy that says that you're in a Zone AE. So then, when the map changes and your renewal comes around, you're going to be grandfathered into that AE because you had a policy in place.
Okay.
Would that be true if I sold the house, the new owner of the house would
Yes. So
have the same situation?
in this scenario, you have a pre-firm. He buys the policy, and then the map changes. So there's still a policy on the house that is in an AE zone. So then whenever he goes to sell the house, that policy will be able to be grandfathered to the new owner for the AE zone.
Roll it over.
Yeah, you have to do a assumption. There's a word I'm trying to get. You'd assume that policy, take it over, but you can even do renewal rollovers at that point, but yes, you would be able to continue the A. That's why it's really, really important to make sure that when the map change comes out, that you just know what the impact of your property is going to be. You have to have the new policy in place before the effective date of the map change. Okay? I read it on the FEMA grandfathering piece of paper right over there. It says that you have to have it in effect before the map change goes into effect. So when we're talking about bill to compliance versus continuous coverage, this is just a little bit more information about that. The lowest floor at or above the BFE of the map at the time of permitting or construction. So that's part of what they look at. Typically, a lot of times people will go to the cities or the towns and ask if, you know, it was for a review of that information. The continuous coverage we just talked about, the policies in place, no lapse within for 90 days or more than 2 lapses. But right now, I think that might have been the material from that other built-in grandfathering. No, so you could have no lapse in the past 90 days, greater than 90 days, and no more than 2 lapses total. They will look at that. They do look at that. Okay. Any questions? And then I'm going to talk about condos, because I know we had a question about the condos.
So how do you get a elevation certificate?
There are numerous surveyors that will go out and do an elevation certificate. The price range is usually anywhere from like $200 to $250. And there's a list of those. Pardon? More than Okay, well,
There's a link on their website to the state's website, and the state
about $350. Is that what they are now?
Department of Agriculture has the list of all the surveyors that are licensed in the state and how many complaints they have against them. So you can kind of get a feel for how
Be
good
careful
the
in your
surveyors
surveyor
are.
too.
Yes, I will say.
Reputable because they,
You do have to review them, and I will say that when I get an elevation certificate, I do look at it quite closely because the diagram, there's a lot of different information on there, the diagram numbers and a lot of information that does need to be reviewed, but that's a good place to start.
How do you know if you had one done prior, say with the previous owner?
Yeah, the town hall has anyone that is still, that they have it on the website. Yeah, it goes on the website. A lot of times the old owner might have one. You know, there's a list of ways that you can look and see before you have a new one. But, yeah.
because they have to be certified.
So the Reddington Shores
Reddington Shores
website
has the town's elevation certificates on it. It's listed by address. And then 2 years ago, legislation went into effect that required surveyors to upload to the state all elevation certificates that they did starting in January of 2017. And there's a link to that on the county website. At the end of Kim's presentation, I'll pull up the flood map service center that the county has. There are links to it from the town website too, but I'll just kind of navigate you through it so you can look at where those topo lines are and where the elevation certificates are and all that. So the town only collects the elevation certificates for building purposes, just to make sure everybody's built in compliance. Elevation certificates for insurance purposes, surveyors are doing left and right, but the town would never get them. So the state started requiring them to upload them.
Yes?
My house was built in '91, and I see on the list that they paid for an elevation certificate, but it was really just a survey. It wasn't a document, elevation certificate.
You didn't get, well, they should have. It should be somewhere. It just that you just may not have it. But I mean, they always do the certificate with the survey.
Usually before you get a CO, they have to have an elevation.
The town doesn't have it either. But I mean, I see the charge. That was when they were 200.
That's right.
That's like 800 now.
So essentially, if you have flood insurance already in zone A,
You're going to be okay.
you're gonna be okay.
Yeah, and it may change if the BFE changes. For those that have coverage in place now, that's the key. That is really the key, is to have the coverage in place before any map change comes down the pike. I mean, that is what, when you walk out of here today, is like, that's the thing to know, is that have coverage in place before the map change. And if you're in A zone, it's not going to change, you know, the rate's not going to change. I mean, it's going to change your regular.
Careful, careful.
You're going to have your normal rate increase on an annual basis, which they're actually coming up April 1st. But it's not going to have the impact that we're talking about going from an A to a V. Okay?
Yeah, that's a big impact.
That's going to be a big impact.
That's a huge impact.
Okay?
Just have that little 25%.
Yeah.
You
It's
know.
like if you want, and that's the other thing, if you don't have insurance on your property now, what you're going to want to make sure that you know is, are you going to be impacted by the A versus the V in the change? Okay. Yes.
Do you want to mention the difference between what flood insurance covers versus contents? Because I think that, my experience at Katrina, that was a problem a lot of people had. They had flood insurance, but they didn't have contents.
They didn't have contents.
Coverage that really paid in.
Sure. And yes, and that even was an issue for some IRMA claims as well. Because flood policy, you have two choices: to cover the building and to cover contents separately. So the building, of course, is going to be your structure, you know, your walls, the actual house, even your cabinets, you know, the actual house itself. Contents is anything that if you turn it upside down and it falls out, that's going to be a separate limit. And one of the issues a lot of times where people try to save on a flood premium is, you know, eliminating contents coverage. And that's one of the areas that, and I've experienced this with claims adjusters that have said, and really if there's a claim and on the house, if you have a mortgage, you know, they don't just come in and stroke you the check in your name. It's going to have the bank on there too. But if you have contents coverage, you know, they can stroke you a check almost right away for a contents limit, at least for a portion of it, to give you money to get you start, you know, to be able to buy things and start living again. But with regards to the two coverages, they are separate. $250,000 is the maximum through the NFIP that you can purchase, and then the $100,000 on your contents. You can buy excess coverage, and it's probably something that a lot of people should look into, especially if you're sitting on a, you know, $250,000 is it. That's all you're going to get from the NFIP on your policy. So if your house is wiped out, that's probably not going to be enough to put it back the way that it sits today. So just understand and recognize, talk to your, you know, your agents about excess flood, because it's something that you should at least look into to see how much it would cost for you to have excess than over the $250,000. So, any other questions about that?
If you happen to have one of the typical, you know, 1950s era low profile homes, we've got a lot of rules about monies that you can spend on structures and things of this sort. How does this play into it? I'm saying I'm flooded, you know, a few $1,000s doesn't go very far if I can't get building permits to make repairs and things of this sort.
Well, at the end of the day, when it's really to a point of where you're at a total loss, you know, most of the time, and weren't you saying that, you know, we were talking about the Katrina claims. You know, some of them were stroking the checks for just the full amount, depending on where the house was located, because the house was no longer there. So that
I'm talking about a block constructed house that's, in all likelihood, it's there, and that's not to say that it's not severely damaged.
I wouldn't.
Well, okay, I might.
Well,
If you
no.
see a Katrina, those were block homes.
Yeah.
And they were blown out because they're hollow.
And my point being,
right.
even if I want to reach in my own pocket, you know, of sufficient means, can I put the house back, given the rules that we apply for permits?
Yeah.
I'll take that. I just asked Steve, do you want to take that or do you want me to take that one? So I'll partially take it and Steve can partially take it. But the regulations, so the point of NFIP doesn't want you, FEMA doesn't want you to build in these high-risk areas. And if you're going to build in these high-risk areas, they want you to be elevated to where you're not going to lose your property. There's not going to be flood damage and flood expense associated with it. So there's something called substantial improvement, substantial damage. So the value of your structure is the value of your structure, and if you want to make improvements to it, they have to stay below that 50% of the value of the structure threshold, or you have to come up to compliance with the FEMA regulations, with the town building regulations. So if you get damaged during a storm, and it is determined to be substantially damaged, at that point, you have no choice but to elevate it. But you can tap into your ICC coverage, your increased cost of compliance coverage.
What's that?
Increased cost of compliance is built into your insurance policies. Kim can talk to this a little bit. And that ICC can only be used if you are deemed substantially damaged after an event. So that's, you know, something that, you know, you got to weigh out. But if you are deemed substantially damaged, you would have to go get a private appraisal to dispute it, to say that you weren't, which is challenging to do because you probably.
So I won't have my terrazzo floors anymore.
No, you won't have your terrazzo floors anymore.
You can lift the whole house.
Yeah, lift the concrete.
For the substantial improvement, it's the market value, is stay below 50% of the market value. Who determines the market value?
Well, you can go based on the property appraiser value, and there's a button, if you go on the property appraiser site, on the top right, there's a link that says FEMA/something, and it has the letter in there, which is the valuation of the structure. So you can use that number, or you can get a private appraisal.
So you can get a
You can get a private appraisal. I mean, it has to be reasonable, or Steve's gonna, you know, make you get another one.
Just
Of just the structure, not the property.
Well, fair market value always includes the land.
No, just the structure only.
And we buy land around here by the square inch, you know, the houses aren't.
Yeah, no, the land, FEMA doesn't care about the land. FEMA's worried about the structure getting damaged and having to do payouts.
All right, well, let's talk real quick about condos. So we were talking about, you know, if you're in a condo association, the association is going to carry the flood insurance on the structure. Because it is a condo association, that's also going to include your cabinets, your wall coverings, your fixtures. It's a lot more inclusive of coverage for a flood than it is for the hazard policy of the association. So, and once again, FEMA is going to, the NFIP limits you to $250,000 per unit regardless of what the value of your unit is or the replacement of your unit is. So, if the association is fully maxed out on how much coverage they can carry on the structure, you can still purchase a policy for your contents. Now, and you're right, I mean, if you're that first floor, second floor, you know, that's where you're going to get the rising. It's not unheard of, and if you look in some of the really, you know, bad claims and horrific situations where if the structure is completely wiped out on those first floors and it takes it down, you know, that's still going to be some flood coverage there for the contents. Is that likely? Does it happen? Yes, it has happened. But normally for the flood insurance for a condo, you're going to have your contents coverage available to you. And as long, once you're over that first floor up, it's a different rate, it's a lower rate, and then it doesn't matter whether you're on the 4th floor or the 7th floor, it's the same rate.
You said something I want to make sure I'm clear on. You said there's a limit of $250,000 no matter how much the estimated value is of your condo. So if I understand, I know that my condo is
Replacement, remember, replacement,
Okay, so
not market value.
That's what I was going to ask you, replacement versus market.
Correct.
How do I determine that, or where would I go to get that to make sure I have enough coverage to deal with the gap?
Well, the association has an appraisal. They get an appraisal done, and it tells you how much the building is insurable from a replacement cost on the flood standpoint. So that gives the association a value. You have access to those appraisals. And then you take that number and you divide by the number of units. So if you're less than 250,000, you can actually even purchase additional flood insurance on your individual flood policy, up to the 250 max. So it doesn't matter whether it's 250 from the association or 250 combined, 250 is it with the NFIP. And then, of course, the associations are eligible for buying additional excess flood coverage, just like we talked about a while ago. We're primarily talking about what the NFIP is going to provide to you. And 250 is the max per unit for the building, not including your contents. Does not cover, a lot of times elevation certificates for the buildings can still be used, and it does include additional building coverage contents, the policy itself, as we talked about. Once again, the pricing is going to vary whether it's pre-firm, post-firm, and whether or not you are in the A, just like a home. So, what are we leaving with today? Once again, if you don't have flood insurance, I do urge you to go ahead and get a quote on your property, just so you know, whenever the maps come out, you'll be able to know whether or not it's going to impact you or not. If you are post-firm, all you need to get a quote is your elevation certificate, but you do need your elevation certificate to get a quote. It's so difficult to try to give you a ballpark because, as you can see, it can be here, it can be here. The information is just, it's just like pulling a number out of the air. Any other questions? Yes?
So, we have a lot of people in our neighborhood. We live in a lot of area that there's cement block 1950s houses that say if they don't have a mortgage and aren't required to have flood insurance, that it's ridiculous to buy flood insurance because it won't help you if your home is substantially damaged. So, because of the 50% rule. So, let's say your home is damaged to the extent of $100,000 and it is rebuildable. Kind of probably not possible, but it is rebuildable, and you just barely fit the 50% rule because let's say the structure is appraised at $200,000.
Well, you won't find 1950s house at 200,000.
But from the insurance,
200,000 structure value?
Yeah, you won't.
Well, how do you know that?
What, you mean it's too low or too high?
Way too high.
How do you know that?
Because it's structured.
Have you seen the house? Okay.
well, let's just say this. Remember, there's two different scenarios here. We're talking about the insurance, and the insurance is still going to pay, if you have a loss, the insurance is going to pay you for damage to your structure. Then, whenever it comes into, rebuilding and doing your permits and all of that, that's going to be separate in terms of
what you do.
What you do, right, what you do with the money at that point. So I would never say that just because the fact that you're going to not be able to build back the way that you sit means that you should not buy insurance. Because flood insurance is going to at least help you with that process of that rebuild, because you're going to have to rebuild one way or the other. You're going to probably rebuild.
But you also said that it's substantial.
Right, and that's all built into the policy, but that's not going to preclude you from working with the building department on making that. You're going to get paid. You're going to get paid for your claim, and then what you do with that money in the rebuild process is separate.
So let's say it's $100,000 worth of damage. So, and let's say you talk with the insurance company and you get $100,000 settlement. So then you sit with Steve and talk to Steve and say, can we repair this for $100,000? And maybe you do it over, beyond 5 years, or you do it on however.
Right. That's going to be that's going to be between you and your builder, your repair people.
Of the 50%, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
So the town has a 5-year cumulative substantial improvement.
Okay. But you would get paid for your, you would get paid. You're not going to not pay you.
Before the damage, 100,000 was all the damage.
25,000 a year.
It goes.
Is there any requirement that you that you do rebuild or do something towards remediating this property in order to get the insurance money?
At the time of the loss?
Mitigating. I think he's
No,
talking.
no.
Sometimes I just want to walk away from it and
You can do
give it
that.
to church, but I want the $100,000 or whatever it is in
Yeah.
my pocket.
It's your
Yep,
insurance process.
yep. It's-
I mean.
As long as there's not a bank
Is the town
involved,
gonna tell me I've got
even with the
to
bank.
tear the house down and remove the
Yeah.
remnants of it or something?
Yeah.
If it's at, in a dilapidated function, we probably do a code enforcement action to have it demolished.
And we can talk about more of that over pizza.
Which is here.
I don't know.
Do you guys want to break out the pizza or do you want to go to the website?
What, when the ICC passed me again, I mean, you guys know this backwards and forwards, and this is, it's all fresh in our minds because of Irma, and we want to make some smart decisions. What does ICC stand for? What does ICC stand for?
Increased cost of compliance.
Increased cost of compliance. And what does that have?
Is it $30,000?
Yeah, it's part of the flood policy, and what we'll do is, I'll pull it up, and then I'll show you, if you're gonna stay for pizza, pull it up and show you how that affects the policy at the time of loss, if it's substantial damage on the property.
No Chrome.
Is that what you're doing now?
I was looking for the Chrome to open up the map
That
service.
was mentioned earlier, I mean, if it was, that.
Oh, the increased cost of compliance. It's just a built-in feature. It's kind of like,
Built-in feature of the
it's kind,
policy.
yes.
Yeah, it
Yes.
comes with it. You have to be deemed substantially damaged to be able to collect.
Okay, yeah.
So it's additional monies available if you have been deemed substantially,
I mean, what, is it a percentage?
it's more than 50% on
I
ours.
mean, if you've got a
Yes.
5,000 square foot single story
wish Ashley was
house
here.
that gets.
I know. I wish it- I think it's like $30,000.
substantially damaged, and you want to build a 5,000 square foot stilt home, it's going to cost more than your $250,000 policy.
Right.
I mean,
That's where, well, and that's why we're talking about, and it is possible to get excess flood coverage as well.
So if you're deemed substantially damaged, that ICC insurance kicks in, and you can get up to $30,000, I believe is the number, the magic
I
number?
think so.
So up to
Yes.
$30,000
Max.
additional on top of whatever your
So
regular
if you have
claim is.
250, it'd be
for a 5,000
280,000.
square foot house ain't going up.
Well,
No.
the point of it is to help you get it elevated and help you meet compliance.
Yes.
This is the map service center that I told you about, and there are topography lines on here. And I'm just gonna show you really, really fast, but if you come over here to, there's USGS, they're only 5-foot contours, but it will give you a ballpark. And then we can zoom in here. And this works best with Chrome. This is Explorer right here, so it probably won't work real well, but those little green lines are all the topo lines. It's thinking, those are the topographic lines. They're 5-foot contour lines. So when we were talking about elevation certificate and should you get an elevation certificate now or later, so you can see here's 180th. So there's a 5-foot contour line through here. So we're looking at elevations, and these are rough, but you can see the zone here is AE with an elevation of 12 feet. And that's rounded to a whole foot, so it could technically be up to 12.4. We'd have to look at the flood insurance study to actually determine what the elevation is. But just for conversation's sake, let's call it 12 feet. And you look over here and there's a 5-foot contour running through your house. You're -7, right? If you have no steps up, if you're just on the ground-ish. So you want to get an elevation certificate now or in a few years? I mean, the rates are going up. They're not going to stop going up. They're going to keep going up. But it's going to be limited how much they go up each year. So you can wait a few years because it's going to take a while to get to that actuary rate.
For pre-firm.
For pre-firm.
Pre-firm. This is pre-firm. But the grandfathered rates are going up too, right?
Yes.
Yes. So all the rates are going up.
All the rates are going
All
up.
the rates
No
are
matter
going
how
up.
much.
They're just trying to keep them incrementally.
Right.
Yep.
All right, well, thanks everyone for coming, and head to the back and have some.
Insurance company.